Tiana Clark. Tiana Clark is the author of the poetry collection, I Can't Talk About the Trees Without the Blood, from University of Pittsburgh Press, 2018. It was the winner of the 2017 Agnes Lynch Starrett Prize, and she's also the author of Equilibrium from Bull City Press, selected by our friend Afaa Michael Weaver for the 2016 Frost Place Chapbook competition. She's a winner of the 2020 Kate Tufts Discovery Award, a 2019 NEA Award, a recipient of a 2019 Pushcart Prize, a winner of the 2017 Furious Flowers Gwendolyn Brooks Centennial Poetry Prize. She is the recipient of scholarships and fellowships to Breadloaf Writers Conference, Sewanee Writers Conference, and Kenyon Review Writers Workshop. She is a graduate of Vanderbilt University MFA and Tennessee State University BA, where she studied Africana and Women's Studies. Her writing has appeared or is forthcoming in The New Yorker, Poetry, The Washington Post, VQR, Tin House, Kenyon Review, BuzzFeed, APR, New England Review, and many others. She teaches creative writing at Southern Illinois University, and she just received the Amy Lowell Traveling Fellowship. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm so excited to be here tonight.
Oh, I was going to finish reading the introduction. That's okay. It's okay. In a wonderful interview in Dive Dapper, Tiana discusses her debut full-length collection, her love of research and epigraphs, and some of her writing philosophy. She says, I've always written from a very personal landscape. And from there, I've always kind of wanted to smash the personal and the political. I'm always looking for ways inside that center of the Venn diagram between the personal and the political. If you have not read this incredible, expansive, intelligent, heart-wrenching collection, I hope you will order it tonight. As Ross Gay writes, critiquing the commodification of Black pain while also acknowledging and reveling your hurt as a Black person is tricky as hell. It is dangerous. And that is precisely what Tiana Clark does in these beautiful, vulnerable, and honest poems. The amazing poet Allison Joseph, who will be reading for us in October with Patricia Spears Jones, says that this debut collection is a book she has waited for her entire life. After you hear her read tonight, you will understand why. Please help me welcome Tiana Clark.
Yay, I'm so sorry. There was a pregnant pause.
Sorry, my intros can be long.
No, they're lovely and so generous. Thank you, Jennifer, so much for spending time with my book. And I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much to the Hudson Valley Writers Center. And I'm so honored and esteemed to read with Paige and Diane. I cannot wait to hear your work. I'm just going to jump right into a long poem. This is called Harvest Moon Long Ass Sonnet. At the beginning of 2020, I made a vision board with Tiana. We cut out pictures from glossy magazines. She asked me questions about the future. We had so many dreams and goals between us rising as steam. At the top of my poster, I put a line from Kim Adonisio, which read, "Listen, I love you, joy is coming." And I clutched that mantra like the ebb and flow of my ocean breath. You know what happened next. The global pandemic, my divorce, the longing, the uncertainty, the switch to online classes, the canceled spring, then summer. What next? I met someone off of Tinder. I met someone off of Hinge. I met someone off of Bumble. Yes, it was such a touch-hungry time. I am now ending this year with a season of solitude, SOS. Maggie Nelson writes in Bluets that loneliness is solitude with a problem. I'm addressing that isolated itch with long walks, looking up in trees and virtual therapy. I've been running away from the silence of myself all year. Oh, I remember the first fireflies I saw with N in late May, or was it early June? I used to say you could see a whole summer in a single firefly, but I don't say that anymore. What is time now? Tiana is reading Robert Hayden this week. We talked about the last line of his sonnet, love's austere and lonely offices, over Marco Polo, the way we mostly keep in touch now. She was focused on the word austere. I lingered over the last two words, lonely offices. The election hasn't even happened yet, and the world is already apocalyptic. Everything is literally and figuratively on fire. I remember when my friend Lindsay sent me pictures of her smoke-polluted street in Portland, a weird and eerie yellow, the occluded sun, her incessant coughing over FaceTime. This poem is longer than a sonnet. Heck, it may not even be a sonnet anymore. I don't care because it got me here. Sometimes you have to start with some restraint, start with form, then flood. I remember my friend Mallory telling me that Terrence Hayes said in a class at NYU that a sonnet is a room you can scream into. And that fury feels like the way to end this year of my 5 lives, my crying jags, this year of hearing my neighbor scream the N-word like a caustic chant in his front yard, this year of hearing my neighbor scream, Black Lives Matter, yeah, fucking right, line them all up and kill them all. This weird year of my neighbor cleaning the bird shit off my car the next day, this endless year of my neighbor, the repetition, and what I keep learning from the repetition. I went on a run recently. I was listening to Dinesh Smith read My Presidents for a virtual reading at Georgia Tech, and I started to weep as I passed a thick patch of black-eyed Susans. It was a near perfect fall day, switching into the gauzy gray soup of pre-night haze. Remember the fireflies? I was waiting for their blinking butts to stipple the greenway, but they never came. They're gone. Done with mating and done with this year too. I recently told N in the middle of the night, which was after the first disastrous presidential debate between Biden and Trump, that I couldn't see him anymore. My body knew before I did what I needed to say and let go of, the chronic sting of certainty. The way I kissed the sine curve of his smooth and seemingly endless shoulder blade, the way you do when you're saying goodbye to someone's skin you know you'll never taste again. And I just bought my first crystal with Tiana, a tangerine aura quartz, the same gilded color of the harvest moon, which was so fucking bright last night. I softly howled at that radiant god eye like a lunatic in love with love, except there was no one to text that night, just me. I went home and drew a bath. I devoured The Lonely City by Olivia Lang. I watched my new old palimpsest body ripple in the creamy, odd blue water like some untranslatable text on photographic paper in a darkroom tank from another world. I am still trying to make space for strangeness. I was peacefully sad and floating. I was underlining sentences. I was looking at words I didn't know or kind of knew or wanted to know deeper without dropping my phone in the bath. Words like salubrious, priapic, effluvia, the definition's already fading. I was thinking about American loneliness because Lang was referencing Hopper and the Nighthawks painting, which made me think of Ed Hirsch's essay about Robert Frost's sonnet, I Am One Acquainted with the Night, which I recently read again, which hit a little bit different in the last quarter of 2020, this year of the coronavirus, this year of my divorce over Zoom, the year of so much sex and suffering, some good sex, some great sex, some buck wild sex, some okay sex, some sex which seemed great at the time, but looking back was just novelty and hard work, like nailing a long IKEA shelf to the wall, which I did by myself this year too. Mostly felt the same, awkward and sweaty, but proud of myself still. I also have another line on my vision board from Linda Gregg, which reads, I will never give up longing. But it's really that last line from Adonisio that I carry and carol the most. I repeat it to myself all the damn time. Listen, I love you, joy is coming. Listen, I love you, joy is coming. Listen, I love you, joy is coming, joy is coming, joy is coming. Started writing bird poems in the pandemic. I stare at a cormorant. I stare at a cormorant with its waterlogged rings spread open, drying off on a rock in the middle of a man-made lake after diving for food. And it makes me think about wonder, and it makes me want to pry and stretch my shy arms open to the subtle summer wind slicing through the park, sliding over my skin like a stream of people blowing candles out over my feathery body. And it makes me think about my church when I was a kid and how I lifted my hands to Jesus, hoping for surrender, but often felt nothing, except for the rush of fervent people wanting to be delivered from their aching present pain, and how that ache changed the smell in the room to money, and how I pinched my face, especially my eyes tighter, reaching my hands higher, how I, like the cormorant, stood in the middle of the sanctuary so exposed and open and wanted so much to grasp the electric weather rushing through the drama of it all, like a shout in the believer's scratchy throat. I don't go to church anymore, but today I woke up early and meditated. I closed my eyes and focused on a fake seed in my hand and put my hands over my heart to shove the intention inside my chest to blossom. I'm still stumbling through this life, hoping for anyone or something to save me. I'm still thinking about the cormorant who disappeared when I was writing this poem. I was just looking down and finishing a line, and then I looked back up. gone. So Jennifer mentioned in that interview my love for epigraphs, which is so great because I'm going to read my epigraph poem, which is basically my love letter to epigraphs. And if you love epigraphs, please let me know in the chat. I was told in my MFA that you shouldn't have too many epigraphs. And I was like, why? Why do we have all these poetry rules? Who writes these rules? I'm here to break all of them joyfully. So this is for anyone who is told not to do something in a poem. This is for you. Broken Ode for the Epigraph, which begins with an epigraph from Erica L. Sanchez, which reads, "Who gave me permission to be this person?" Oh, intertextuality, oh, little foyer to my poem, oh, little first and foremost, my amuse-bouche, meaning mouth amuser, a little glimpse of the meal to come. And if I could, I would add an epigraph over everything. Wait, who says that I can't? I've always been too much, and I'm just now beginning to cherish this too muchness booming late Baroque Rococo in my chest, little shells of scattered light decorating the caves in my poems. I wish people came with little epigraphs tacked on their foreheads. A little foreshadow couldn't hurt. I wish fruits had a few ripe lines above their clue numbers, a little sneaky peeky of the pulp to come. Oh, little cup holder for my quotes. I love how you hover over the house of my poem like a cloud from another book or a bite from another lover, a way to say I just couldn't help myself here. See, I cut out these lines for you like fuzzy flower stems severed at an angle, and they were briefly dead until I placed them in a vase on top of my poems, prolonging their life again, such moxie. Because if anything, the epigraph is a little clay container of water, and I place these blossoms in a vase of life juice because you're visiting the home of my poem, and I want you to feel special. And I think fresh cut flowers might make people feel sacchariferous, at least they do for me, especially when my mother-in-law walks barefoot into her gorgeous garden and snips the long lit stems from the sun bursting forsythia bush, even though we haven't talked in months, even though I wrote a poem about her that hurt her, a poem that started with an epigraph from Natasha Trethewey. And we talked about it over email and then over coffee, and then there was forgiveness, both sides, and that was it. See the flowers. I've always deeply loved Natasha Trethewey's work because her parents are like my parents, Black mom, white dad, another type of epigraph, right? Do you understand what kind of permission that releases inside of me? Do you understand how cellular and specific? Sometimes it's important to know about the blood before the poem starts. Who makes up these rules about procedure anyway? I come from clutter. I feel safe under that little liminal space below the title, underneath the stairs, and before that first line. Toy Derricott writes, "I am not afraid to be memoir." Yes, I feel a great affection for Toy Derricott because she has a similar first name as my grandmother, but spelled differently. And also because she drew her beloved dead fish Telly in my copy of The Undertaker's Daughter, writing, "Telly loves you," with the bubbles and everything. Well, then I'm not afraid to be the epigraph, damn it. I'm joyfully trying to break every rule about poem making that I know. I want to wake up and like myself more. I want to wake up and like myself more. I want to wake up and like myself more and believe it each time I repeat it. I want to revel in my poems the way Danica Kelly does. Have you heard Danica talk about poems? Do it. Absolute pleasure. I want more of that giddy precision. I want to wake up and address myself like the badass motherfucking epigraph that I am. Hello, epigraph! I'm beginning my body before my body begins. I want to start my day with somebody else's words. For example, this morning, I started with Ross Gay's The Book of Delights, and I keep grinning and underlining words like delight radar and delight muscle, and that image of stacking delights like pancakes. And I can hear Ross's voice as I read them, his joyous timbre almost shouting inside these smile-inducing sentences, which linger over the blue length of my day. And I just got back from AWP in Portland, where I heard Jose Olivares say, "Lean into length" on a panel about poetry podcast. I wrote it down, and underneath his words scribbled, possible epigraph. Epigraph, a little foreplay, a little playful forest. I'm safe now, so I can play. A little forecast of my mood and tone, a little incantation, little wordy satellites in the white spaces orbiting the sky parlor of my poems. Epigraph my father I've never met, but how I meet and let him go at the beginning of every poem that I write, and isn't lost perpetually dripping sap from the injured trees, bruised or cut in our knuckles as we write, sticky sap spilling from the wound, pitching to survive the bites. And aren't we all writing the same damn poem over and over again anyway? Didn't Jack Spicer allude to that once by translating Lorca? I want to go back to that first epigraph. The easy association will be God, right? So like this, God coos above the waters of their pre-world, scanning over all that gooey potential, a bajillion possibilities, millions of us already there, little epigraphs in the making, gleaming in that first sentence struck light, the imperative big bang of God's never-ending breath. But what if that first epigraph wasn't so spectacular? What if it was just someone messaging me on one of those spit in a tube DNA ancestry sites, saying that they're my second cousin, saying they know how to get in touch with my dad? Oh, the sheer possibility, I cried. Saying that they would give him my number and email address, saying that they told him I didn't want or need any money, but how he still never reached out. My neighbor started pumping some slow jams in the background. I don't know if you can hear it, but I can. Maybe you can. Okay, good. Okay. It's a personal soundtrack for me. Great. I'm gonna read one more newer poem-ish, and then I'll read some from the book, and then we'll take it away, Paige. My daddies have voices like bachelors, like castigators and crooners, and that title's a line actually from a Terence Hayes poem. Daughter, you make me shudder, make music of my bones, don't you? Yes, like castanets. The best blood of my blood, soft blood, boiled blood of not knowing, bright blood is still in you now. Blushing scarlet cells blossoming in your face, plasma rich as juicy figs cut open and gleaming. Muscling that dark abyss, I am the jumbo starfish skimming and slurping the wounded deep sea floor. To get close enough, I came to Nashville once. I wanted to feel the friction and fiction of having a daughter there. I watched you working at the restaurant near the replica of the Parthenon with the massive statue of Athena burning hot and fat and gold inside like a secret sun. I didn't sit in your section, but near it. I saw your almond eyes, my eyes. I saw my nose, your nose, the pleasure of my face in your face, barometric. The first words I could not gather were on your cheeks, passerines perched on telephone wires, soundless black ovals and lines like unsung musical notes on a scale. I said nothing as you passed by, swaying dirty martinis in your hands, aglow like a censer. Perfume of blue cheese and briny olive juice, murky as the memory, strained as the jade distance between us. I was the last guest at the bar, still pushing my slick steak across the white china, knife clinking, carving the wet meat into smaller pieces of meat, dark animal juice, gristle tug, tough and delicate tearing. I was stalling. I didn't want to eat it. I didn't want another reason to get up and leave you. You walked by me again. I whispered and mouthed slowly, olive juice. Didn't you watch my greasy lips as I said it? Almost looked like I said it, huh? Dear daughter, say it in the mirror, and that's me saying it, okay? Could that mouthing of silent love, or persona love, or mimetic love, or epistolary love, or your pain is misplaced here kind of love, or even in the dinging repetition of daddyless love, or any kind of damn love ever be enough? Oh, I didn't know how to finish this poem, love, and I've been editing it for years, love, until Jessica Jacobs made me rip it up, love, across a table until I could see the scaffolding, until I could see the secret of my poem, love, which is father, daughter, reader, lover. I don't have to tell you everything. I'm working on that though. I still tell everyone everything. Okay, I'll read a couple from my book. Midnight to 3 a.m. I glare at my husband snoring and think of mulatto house slaves, not all of them, just the ones that might have looked like me and were petrified like me to touch themselves down there, down where it's burnt and swollen, to worship that weak part of me that's cream, to hunger the part of me that's white matter separated, the forgotten phonics of blood thickening the room with red platelets. I close his mouth, I clap my hands, I turn him over to stop and start myself. Rituals, which begins with an epigraph from Stuart Dybek, which reads, "What does it matter? We made not doing it a wonder." The most dangerous game for me is sex and syntax. Your hand, so familiar, and terrifying as family reaches for my name and then my navel, which is a cup of hunger, always in that order. My hand drags after loss, after some inexact past. The wet mood lingers erotic with the scent of a half-peeled orange, broken by a nasty thumbnail. The moment clicks and disappears again before we attempt release, this hardened honey, this slow drip of joy. Another spider approaches and then I smash it, smearing gorgeous little guts like black lotion. Strange how desire is greedy and silent in stasis. Strange how two bodies can grow without branches. And again, how do you diagram two broken bodies without parsing, without penetration? Is this still what I want? Another year, another sip of good bourbon, neat and decadent. Something like a lock unlatches. Another hard world approaches without water. Another hard world approaches without fur. Another hard world approaches and approaches without punctuation, enters without sucking salt from these two bodies, starved and pulsating on the brink of so much touching and not touching. I ache for grammar when it's bent and fluid. I ache for him, for her, and then for myself, always in that order, last and less. I hum, I bang, I bite, I touch myself, my many selves. If I whimper, can I call it God? Oh God, please delay the verbs. Once in bed, you finally gave me what I wanted, but I didn't want it anymore. The whipped cream slid from your cool nipples in strings of white tears. See, I'd already eaten so much sugar that day. I was so full and sick of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What an amazing reading. And if you don't have Tiana's book, you can order it from your local bookstore. Sophia has put in the chat all of the information. And now we have Paige coming to us, and this is her beautiful new collection that just came out in June of 2020. Paige Hill Starzinger's second poetry collection, Vortex Street, was published in June 2020 from Barrow Street. Her first book, Vestigial, was selected by Lynn Emanuel to win the Barrow Street Book Prize. Her chapbook, Unshelter, chosen by Mary Jo Bang, was the winner of the Noemi contest and published in 2009. Her poems have appeared widely in American Poetry Review, Kenyon Review, Fence, West Branch, Pleiades, Volt, and many other journals. She was a Peter Taylor Fellow at Kenyon Review Summer Workshops in 2014 and 2018, and she taught a craft class at the Frost Place. She lives in New York City. Mary Oliver has said, to pay attention, this is our endless and proper work. And Vortex Street is a collection that epitomizes this singular act of paying attention. In a wonderful interview that Paige did with Tyler Mills in On the Seawall, Paige discusses her collection, writing about women's bodies and writing about the natural world. In that interview, she says, I feel anger when gardeners insist on pinching off flowers before they go to seed. There's life in winter, I want to say to them. Birds and insects find protection in plant stems and in ground cover. Dried seed heads are food for birds in the cold. If we only value spring and summer, what does this say about us? If we cut everything off in the late fall to push more vibrant blossoms only in summer, what does this say? Paige's imagistic poems are searing in their honesty, and her mastery of white space and silence are evident in every poem in Vortex Street. One of our favorite summer readings at the center when we were in person was a few summers ago when Paige read with David Baker. It is my pleasure to welcome her back to celebrate her wonderful collection. Please help me welcome Paige Hill Starzinger. You just have to unmute.
There we go.
Perfect.
Sorry. That was amazing. Thank you, Jennifer, for that very generous introduction. And Tiana, what an amazing reading. Thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing Di. Going to start right in. Excavations from the tomb of the second pharaoh, 12th dynasty. No thanks. I don't want to take the survey. The young waxer touches me in a way I know she thinks I'm old. I recognize it because I touch my mother this way. This is me, stripped bare, a knee I don't know, a long back that's familiar, a stranger's breast. How do you settle in a body for so long, still want it to change, still it changes? Annotated legs, enlarged knuckles, skin tone muddied, some firm padding gone. I ask the guard where Middle Kingdom is, and he shows me. Coffins with mummies tipped sideways, heads lined up with blue-rimmed eyes so they can see life through the caskets. Leg, lotus, snails, snakes, anka. Necklaces so delicate, amulets strung on thin strings. Lack of clasps, and they survive. I'm going to read two parts of a longer poem called Specula. And specula is a medical instrument for examination. It dilates parts of the body. It's also the Latin word for mirror. Specula. To the man pressing the sonogram over my ovary, who is saying, it's completely shut down. It is still part of my body. It is alive. It is mine. I want to know, is it velvety when you hold it? Is it ghostly white? Is it fragrant? Does it hum? Magnificent glands, corrugated, grooved, and furrowed. This is where my children would have sprung if you could time-lapse back. Aliyah, meaning dice, as in aleatoric music. Mozart selected a precise sequence of notes based on throwing a handful. Beauties we are, we say, beautiful, estradiol in our vaginas, and windswept fires in our veins. And then I'm going to read a section from the center of Specula. What of need when you want less? When you think you want less? When the self is less, you think? Look how my bones, osteoporosis, my pelvis, endometriosis, my ribs, fractious. This is the house, my only home. I own no other. I lease one car. This is my body, the beauty, yes, I abandoned to feed on more expensive tastes. A cage to decorate became a cage to pain. This structure, this cage, if I could build a cage instead. How do you disinherit yourself? Tectonic, indeed. Normal faults create space when the ground cracks. But as one tectonic plate forces itself on another, this is a thrust fault. I am full of faults. Natural mistakes, they lie until uncovered. Fun fact, a fault under the Himalayan peaks pushes them up by a centimeter each year. Would my life coach think this was busy work? This next poem, I warn you, has violence in it. It's based on an article out of Mumbai about an episode there, but of course it could come from any country, and certainly ours. Hook. To hang from heels, 24 articulating vertebrae falling into their own curves. This backbone, same for swans as sloths. Dangling thread of bored young men and beautiful deer, they called her, who vanished. Did not respond for article headlined gang rape, routine, and invisible. Is one surprised? Now reporting, is the only universal human word, not mama, as linguists believed. Especially as Carmen Tarleton emerges with a new face stitched to her scalp after her husband beat her with a baseball bat, soaked her with industrial lye, squirted from a dish soap bottle. A spinous process, downward and backward to the sacral pelvic girdle. Atlas and axis. Oh, sorry. Atlas and axis aligning like a bowstring. Now this next one has many voices in it. One of the main voices is from a learning module, a marketing learning module that I took when I was in the copy department at a cosmetic company. But you also hear about Mary Tyler Moore, Shelley Hack, who was the Charlie perfume star. In other words, working women of another generation, or I should put that in quotes, working women, you know, they were on TV. They were not real working women. And the narrator at the end conjures her child, who is not alive. And the book has lots of poems that have conversations with this unborn child. My learning path. Today, my digital learning module says, it's crucial that your presence is optimized. I can see that. My eyes are bleary. I'm baffled and blown over by learning how to pull a qualified consumer through the purchase funnel. Remember Mary Tyler Moore tossing her Tam O'Shanter up into the city lights, lit sky at 7th and Nicollet in a double-breasted peacoat. That huge smile. An unwitting extra, just plain old Hazel Frederick, exit a department store in cat eye glasses, forever caught between words in the final credits. Today, I am trying to bring content to life, but there is an issue. I mean, opportunity, time decay. Shelley Hack, leaping out of a cream convertible Rolls Royce and striding into, was it Cafe Carlisle? Bobby Short on piano. First time a woman wore pants in a fragrance ad. 1973. I must abandon the period Once a pause, now unnecessarily harsh. Snap my chat. Thanks for joining me today as we disrupt. Today, at Celine's runway show in Paris, the designer who knows what real women want, played a soundtrack of far-off city traffic and children's voices, as if getting dropped off at school. Need a trouser suit? A reporter asks. On every seat, a quote from artist Dan Graham. I want to show that our bodies are bound in the world, whether we like it or not. Today, I'd say we like it. They are. Citrus, cyclamen, tarragon, oak moss, and rose. And I will name you, my child, and you shall exist like a character in a fictive world so true that we touch. Velvet petaled starry jasmine climbing mossy stone walls at the edge of a forest of unknown parts. The wind catching tendrils, birds' feathers, dried weeds, lifting them up in circles. No script, no credits, no. I'm going to read a newer poem now, and I'm reading it because it was in West Branch, and G.C. Waldrop I just saw that he is retiring from West Branch as editor, and I read this to honor him. He's been a great supporter to many poets like myself. I eclipse. I snap a photo of only a slice of my face, rarely even half, mostly just eye and cheekbone, hair, and in the distance, a window cracks onto a mirror, a path winnows to a door, eclipse. These obscurations, a coming between, entering a shadow of the primary, from Greek, to forsake its accustomed place. Clip your toes and winged heels, Achilles, then dash through the page, absent or deprived of light. A universal darkness, as the night hag dances with Lapland witches. Laboring moon, writes Milton in Paradise Lost. Eclipsed was he. Ha ha. My work is done, I said the other day, as if finding a link to David's pesky conference form was some sort of extra difficult feat. Starry my sight. Not quite, when one reads about Gerda Taro, age 26, dying on front lines in the Spanish Civil War, broadsided by a reversing army tank. Her photos often attributed to Robert Capa, most acclaimed war photographer of the 20th century. But Google highlighted her on their doodle, August 1, 2018, and now I know partially about her. Path of totality righted by a logo, or not. Eek, one learns to look away. Ichet, next in the OED, also idiot, reports our favorite dictionary. Sometimes you just want to throw up your digits. Or return to language. Surgisti, for instance, alignment of three or so celestial bodies occluding each other. Not to belabor the points, but Tarot, called the little fox for her small size, stealth, quickness, and strawberry blonde mane, sly. She even concocted her own name, referencing Greta. Suffice it to say, this anti-fascist bivouacked with Republican forces, fought Stalinists and anti-Semites with every camera wit. writ on air. This next poem is newer, and the title, As Maple Trunks Thaw. I was pushed out of my mother's body one April, cold and wet, in the 5th season of the year, a measure of frost and mud. It was past the last sap boil, more amber than gold. I was a dial suspended in a chunk of glass like ice, my initials carved into it. Today, I click into a digital video conference. Faces populate, time snags, and pixels sputter, so someone looks like a Francis Bacon portrait, enlarged head leaking over the chest. We share 35% of our DNA with daffodils, 98% with chimps. Our cars burn dinosaur bones, and the oxygen we breathe is an excretion of ancient bacteria. Is it any wonder we romanticize a row of tall pines set against empty sky, the sunset, a family, different sizes and shapes, calling each other as a wind rumbles through them? A song like a cello might make before it was crafted into an instrument. And the last poem I'm going to read is the last poem in Vortex Street. And it's one of a couple love poems in the book. Landing. And about his touch, slightly salty, sun brown, pressing down into bed sheets, faint aroma of pool, nestling of green palm fronds on window, and then trying another way, tan earlobe, blue speckled eyes, round sides and feet, the soles, relaxing finally. Sound from somewhere inside me I'm not familiar with, as if I evaporated to reappear, shorn, stepping outside myself. No. In the mirror afterward, recognizing my mother's white hair, remembering her saying how much she liked mine when it was long. And then grief, like a sudden thing, or so it seemed. Stepping barefoot into a tidal bay, slipping into briny waves, thinking of what lies deeper than I will go. Basket stars extending arms like nets to catch small crustaceans. Lava crystallizing into glass as it tumbles through mesopelagic waters. Consider, from the time of Pliny until the 19th century, no one thought there was life at great depths. You say I'm melancholy, but how beautiful to think of what lies further out. If regret is part of this, so be it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paige. That was really beautiful. And here it is again, Vortex Street. Sophia has put the information to order in the chat. Please help support these wonderful poets. And now we have Diane Seuss. Diane Seuss's most recent collection is Frank Sonnets from Grey Wolf Press, 2021. She's also the author of Still Life with Two Dead Peacocks and a Girl, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Los Angeles Times Book Prize in Poetry Four-Legged Girl was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Seuss is a 2020 Guggenheim Fellow. She was raised by a single mother in rural Michigan, which she continues to call home. Frank Sonnets is much more than a memoir in verse. It is an entire universe. It is unusual for me that I don't read a book of poetry in one sitting, but these sonnets are so full of life, so imaginative in their imagery and syntax that I had to read a few of them at a time and savor them. In a wonderful interview in Tupelo Quarterly, Diane says about the book, what if I write a memoir in sonnets? What if the memoir is less about what happened than how I remember what happened, about the nature of memory, about the nature of thinking about memory? I am not using question marks here because they were not really questions. They were statements of intent from my brain tucked within the jewelry box of my skull. Most of my friends have been reading this book continuously since it was published. It is a testament to the power of her work that each time you pick up this book, you learn something new about what poetry can do. This book is a revelation. Like all great art, these poems are completely unique and utterly universal. Please help me welcome Diane Seuss.
Thank you. That was amazing. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. All right. So, first of all, I just want to thank, trying to get rid of my, there we go. I want to thank the Hudson Valley Writers Center, which is so cool, and Sophia Bannister, who helps with all of the stuff that goes into making these readings happen, including all the publicity. And Jennifer Franklin, of course, who leads us and leads this reading series. And I appreciate her kindness and graciousness. And then thank you to my co-readers, Paige and Tiana. I mean, holy shit, right? So thank you very much, you guys. I thought that I would start with the first poem in the book, just to kind of get us situated, and then we'll go from there. So I wasn't really sure what I was going to do in this book, but I was doing a residency out in Washington State, and I was feeling kind of lost. And this is the first sonnet that I wrote that came out of that experience. I drove all the way to Cape Disappointment, but didn't have the energy to get out of the car. Rental, blue Ford Focus. I had to stop in a semi-public place to pee on the ground, just squatted there on the roadside. I don't know what's up with my bladder. I pee and then I have to pee and pee again. Instead of sightseeing, I climbed into the back seat of the car and took a nap. I'm a little like Frank O'Hara without the handsome nose and penis and the New York school and Larry Rivers. Paid for a day pass at Cape Disappointment, thinking hard about that long drop from the lighthouse to the sea. Thought about going into the Ocean Medical Center for a checkup, but how do I explain this restless search for beauty or relief? So that, I guess that was the state that I brought to this book. Intimacy unhinged, unpaddocked me. I didn't want it. Believe me, I didn't want it anymore. Who in their right mind? And then it came like an ice cream truck with its weird tinkling music, its sweet frost. I fled to the shore and saw how death-strewn all the body parts washed up and sucked clean, like that floor mosaic by Seuss of Pergamon, unswept house. Seabirds flocked and dematerialized like they do. Bees raged at their own dethroning. Love came close anyway, found me out, its warped music all the rage. It had a way, just by being in proximity, of opening the shells of the bivalves, disclosing their secret meat. One doesn't really suck on frozen sugar water. One allows it to melt in the oven of the mouth. Poetry, the only father, landscape, moon, food. The bowl of clam chowder in Nakata, was I happy? Mountains of oyster shells, gleaming silver, poetry, the only gold. Or is it? My breasts, feet, my hands, index finger, fingernail, hangnail, paper cut, what is divine? I drove to the sea, wandered aimlessly. I stared at my tree. I said in my mind, there's my tree. There's my tree, I said in my mind. I remember myself before words, thrilled at my parents' touch. Opened milkweed with no agenda, blew the fluff, no reaching for comparison. To be free of signification, wriggle out of the figurative itchy sweater, body, breasts, vulva, little cave of the uterus, clit, need, touch, come. I came before I knew what coming was, iambic pentameter. Did I feel it? Does language eclipse feeling? Does it eclipse the eclipse? I haven't really read this one from Frank yet. My first crush was Wild Bill Hickok. Not the actual guy, but the guy who portrayed him on TV, Guy Madison, who died of emphysema, whose grandson was killed in action in Iraq. What did cowboys do all day, I wondered, aside from gunfighting? Figuring out whether they'd be good or bad, which determined the color of the hat. My hat, how did my mother afford it? Bought at West Variety, powder blue. My gun, a toy. I was wise enough at age 3 to own my projections. I would become what I loved. My mother didn't hover as I decided what I'd do with what I was. Her best friend made a particle board lid for the crib so she could go out on the cement slab and drink highballs unimpeded by kids who all turned out fine and loved her madly, though half of them died young in motorcycle wrecks. My mother didn't care if I rescued or killed or swung from a noose until I was dead. That was my domain. Her domain was TV dinners and James Joyce. Mickle's first crush was the body of a young hung TV cowboy who swung from the noose in a spiral pattern. Mickle called home his projections and likewise died young and hung. I decided my kind of cowboy would read tall tales from a tall book called Tall Tales about tornadoes and card games and white whales. These are sonnets, sort of loosely defined. They're all 14 lines. Some are very sort of little stories like that one. Others are almost songs. And so I knew that if I was going to do a big book of sonnets, I needed to provide a lot of range. This is about Jesus and the harrowing of hell, in which some versions of Christianity believe that Jesus, after he was crucified, went down to hell and harrowed it, meaning kind of fucked shit up, and then brought back with him souls to be sort of cleansed and revived. But I place this harrowing in the town where I was raised. He came to us all the way down here with us. He trod the narrow path to us. He harrowed us. He robbed us of our stuff, and then he bade us to adore the very robber who had robbed us of ourselves. He swept his empty hand across our shelves. He commandeered our dust. He loosed the goats, rejoined the milky mothers to their calves. He cut our drooping fruits in halves, infringed upon our lust. He mesmerized the feral cats and charmed them from the pea-marked corners of the barn into god-awful light. He strode across our ashes and our blight, the fields we burned to rid ourselves of parasitic worms and ticks. He snared our seeds and jarred our feeble bees. He gathered up our kids, the ones who squeezed their dirty feet into ill-begotten shoes, the brood of meth and thunderbird, whose amniotic sacs were tinted blue. He harrowed us, unbarrowed us, he sparrowed us, and nailed us. Then he jacked our 7-Eleven and hauled us up to heaven. This comes from a sequence of poems in Frank about my friend Mikkel, who was a soulmate that I knew in my hometown. And he went on to move to San Francisco to be himself. And he called me in 1985 to say that he had a lesion on his leg and found out that he had AIDS. And this comes out of that. And it's him on the cover of Frank, by the way. There he is, pretending to be macho. I saw a little movie of a person stroking a small bird with 2 Q-tips, one held between the forefinger and thumb of each hand. It tipped back its head to receive the minor tenderness, which to the bird must have felt like being touched by God. For a moment, I knew what it would be to feel at the mercy of love, small scale, the kind shown but not spoken of. I was afraid to touch you. I was afraid of the lesions you described to me over the phone, their locations and the measurement in centimeters of each. Jesus marks, you called them. All so I would be prepared and unafraid, or less afraid, but still I was afraid of dying like you were dying. When I first arrived, I looked so long into your eyes, you shivered and ordered me to look away. You were imperious in your dying, yet courtly about my fear. You understood, as if I were a child afraid of lightning storms, which I am, having at age 10 been struck. Out of the blue, you said that once you were dead, I'd never be able to listen to Blue again. Joni Mitchell's Blue, not just the song, but the whole album. It was a minor curse you lay across my shoulders like a fur-dyed blue. And so I listen now in defiance of you. In the listening, the pronoun shifts. We are listening. There is no death. And I'll end with one more. I have slept in many places, for years on mattresses that entered my life via nothing but luck. As a child on wet sheets, I could not contain myself. As a teen on the bed where my father ate his last pomegranate, among crickets and chicken bones in ditches, in the bare grass on the lavish grounds of a crumbling castle, in a flapping German circus tent, in a lean-to, my head on the belly of a sick calf, in a terrible darkness where a shrew tried to stay afloat in a bucket of well water, in a blue belfry, on a pink couch being eaten from the inside by field mice, on bare floorboards by TV light with Mickle on Locust Place, on an amber throne of cockroach casings, on a carpet of needles from a cemetery pine, in a clubhouse circled by crabapple trees with high school boys who are now members of a megachurch, in a hotel bathtub in St. Augustine after a sip from the fountain of youth, cold on a cliff's edge, passed out cold on train tracks, in a hospital bed, holding my lamb like an army of lilacs. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Di.
Yeah.
What an amazing reading from the three of you tonight. Really, really grateful to have all of you here with us. So Sophia and I are going to pin you to the screen together so we can have our Q&A and everyone can see all of you. I know we've been too enthralled by the reading to think of questions yet or to type any into the chat. People were just giving you snaps and repeating your lines in the chat. So we'll save those for you so you can read them later. But maybe we'll just start out with one question that we always tend to ask the poets who come to read for us in our series, because we have so many students here, especially students working on their first full-length collections. So maybe if the three of you could share a little advice that you have for our students in terms of craft or anything else you'd like to, words of wisdom you'd like to share with them.
Okay, I'll jump in. I would say trust yourself. It's the hardest thing to do for some of us. And as wacky, as unique, as odd, if you're in a workshop and people are trying to fix it, maybe don't fix it. The more individual your voice is, the more important in a way it is. And the more maybe people will catch up to.
I'll quickly share some advice from some heroes of mine. One is from Ross Gay. I asked him one time what he was looking for because he was judging a lot of first book contests at the time. And he just said 2 words that kind of changed my life. And he just said, broken shit. He's like, I'm into a manuscript that hasn't figured itself out yet. He's like, I'm looking for a poet that is taking risks and maybe they aren't actually executing them, but I'd rather see the risk. And when he said that, I just felt this like exhalation of relief that it didn't have to be perfect, that I didn't have to have everything nailed. Of course, yes, you're gonna revise and you're gonna work hard, but this idea that I didn't have to have everything figured out, that it was okay to wait in uncertainty and ambiguity and to have strangeness and to wrestle with that unknowingness inside my first book. Just, it actually helped me complete my book. So I always carry with me the idea of broken shit. And then once when I was at a workshop with Robert Haas in Swanee, he was like, I don't know about this line. And I was like, oh, I'll cut it, sir, I'll cut it. I was like very deferent as like the people pleasing MFA student. He was like, kind of was like, what is wrong with you? Like, and I was like, oh, well, I'll take it out. And he's like, why would you do that? He's like, I'm just one person. He was like, read it to 3 or 4 other people. And he was like, there was an instinct that got you to this line. Maybe not the instinct is not to cut it, but to actually go deeper. And that was another benefit for me to actually have a more maximalist mask, because I think so much in workshop it's cut. And again, yes, there's a place for that. But I realized that I was chasing a type of bigness that I felt like I wasn't allowed to. And it gave me permission to chase that. And that was really to trust and chase my own imagination. And that was really powerful for me.
Both great pieces of advice from both of you. I would say those 2 things, and then also add, because of social media, because of the internet, there's so much access to so much poetry, which is fabulous. And also, what I've seen in my students over the years, it's daunting because there's a feeling of, they start crowdsourcing every move they make in a poem. And in a way, you have to take the fruit and then kind of be willing to be alone in your imagination, as scary as that can be, and not try to write sort of for the crowd mentality or even for the workshop mentality. I think what Tiana is saying is so true, that, that tendency to feel that everything has to be cut away when you are a poet of largesse. So is Whitman. So are a lot of amazing people, right? And so just beware of the conventionalizing forces of sort of poetry that goes viral or whatever. You have your own thing, and the only place to find it is within.
Those are all great answers. Thank you so much for talking about that. We have a question for Paige from Sarah. She says she's an X-ray tech. So she kept vibrating and squealing with delight over all of the skeletal terminology. So often the body is used as a monolith composite in contemporary poetry. What made you learn the terminology, and how does that heightened specificity of the body affect you personally and as a poet?
I think, again, well, first of all, I kind of dive into research. I know Tiana does this too. I've read interviews with Tiana, and a lot of, I can't talk about the trees without the blood. There's some incredibly researched poems in there about historical figures. Anyway, it gives you a different terminology to kind of disrupt the poem, and it felt like I was getting inside the body, and also raising up parts of the body that are usually thought of as icky or overlooked. I mean, a lot of my work is about things that are things that are overlooked. And I don't know, it was instinctive. My first book spent a lot of poetry time in the Oxford English Dictionary. I like diving into those crevices and into those into technical detail.
Tiana, when you were talking about your advice, you were talking about the advice that you were given to maybe expand. And that reminded me of what you were talking about in the interview. I think it was in Dive Dapper, where you were talking about Roger Reeves saying that whenever he sees a white woman, he gets out of the way. And so that he, as a corollary to that, he likes to make his poems as long as possible on the page. And you do have a lot of really long poems in the book, and I think you're right that in MFA programs and in workshop in general, our instinct is to cut, is to take away. Could you talk a little bit more about that idea of expansion in your work?
Yeah, oh boy, I was like, I thought you wanted me to talk about workshop. I was like, oh no, I'm not ready. But I do think that's something to talk about, because I think about that, the workshop is a place that it can't really handle long poems really well. Or, a lot of people have critiques about even novels. So like a lot of fiction writers that go to MFA programs, have troubles with their novels. Or even, I know some MFA programs in the third year, when you actually have your book, of what does it mean to workshop a book of poems? And so how does the workshop make space for that? But yeah, I think expansion is something that I was chasing after the 2016 election. I felt really small in the world. And that interview with Roger Reeves was one of those like aha, light bulb, Emily Dickinson screen off the head moment of asking myself, where was I not having the audacity? And there's something really powerful for me as a Black woman to take up as much space as possible. I mean, pages are real estate. So to say like, I'm going to be like in Park Place and take up as much real estate in a literary journal, it feels really powerful. And David Baker's here, and he was so cool. I actually have my long poem, The First Black Bachelorette. When I submitted it, I said, I don't know if this is 7 poems or this is 1 poem. And that was actually me kind of being sheepish in my cover letter, because it's also scary to submit a long poem when you're a newer poet. And but he came back and he was just like, this is 1 poem, I believe in it. And it made me so happy that an editor saw that vision, because it does take a lot of grit to be like, I'm doing this. So I just think I'm chasing that breathlessness and that borderlessness in my work. One of my, I think it's in Bia Seekers, says that poetry is the organization of breath. And so to me, like, what does it mean to chase that to exhaustion? And for me, I'm also trying to make my way for my own survival and to make my place where I didn't see myself in the canon before. And so that's going to take some length. It's going to take some time.
As a follow-up question for Diane on this, I've never felt a sonnet being so big before as reading this book. And I think that it's so interesting to read longer poems than in right up against, and hear these longer poems from Tiana right up against your poems, because if you heard them without looking at them in the book, I'm not sure people would necessarily know that they were only 14 lines. And I just was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that process of writing these sonnets and how much they can contain.
Yeah, it surprised me how much they could contain, and how sometimes they could be really focused on a moment, and other times they could leap through time and space. It was really fun to be able to leap through time and space using language. But, I see the sonnet as, it's like the epidermis of the body that can contain all this stuff. If you take out the intestines, they're like endless, but they're within this compressed space of the body. And so, like Tiana, I had primarily, like you're talking about in terms of sort of that boundarylessness, that had always been my aesthetic. I was a free verse person, and most of my poems were longer. And I loved the feeling of associative mind. And so when I got to this moment of working on Frank, I have a theory that whatever you do next ought to be the hard thing, ought to be the thing that is uncomfortable. And for me, the hard thing was compressing. And I thought, okay, what would happen to language from me if I compressed? And what I learned is that sometimes, yes, it's compressive, but other times it's expansive. And who knew, right? And now I'm expanding again, and I'm utterly uncomfortable, absolutely uncomfortable. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, the sonnet gave me this edge that I think I needed in order to do something called memoir. I needed to, you know, my life was as such that without that edge, without that limitation, I really didn't know if I could take it. You know, some of the poems, I didn't read these, but the heart, the belly of the book has a lot of poems about my son's addiction. You know, there's a lot of loss and grief in the book. And so the sonnet held me up. It was like a safety net that kept me from freaking out by my subjects. I urge everybody to try, just go for 14 lines for a while and see what happens to your approach to language. And if you tend to write long, try short. If you tend to write short, try long. If you tend to be free verse, try a form and see what happens. I'm always trying to keep myself from being habitual. Habitual.
Thank you for that, Anne. We are getting questions in the chat. So if we are not able to get to your question, sorry in advance. A question for everyone from Brian is, cultivate your obsessions. When or how does something hooks in you?
I'm not sure I heard the last part.
The last part was when or how things get its hooks in you.
Oh.
And he also, do you decide in advance of writing a poem, or do you actively fill gaps with research?
Paige, you're on, girl.
Yeah, okay. It's instinctive. It comes first. I don't feel, I mean, it's not filling in certainly for me, and I don't I would guess it isn't for Diane or Tiana, but it's just instinctive. You're curious, you follow your curiosity, and that's part of trusting yourself. Follow your curiosity, go wherever it goes. I tear out, I still get the paper, and I'll tear out, and now I keep digital files of articles that fascinate me. And then when you look at them together, it's interesting what you find. And that can open up things. I mean, I could spend my whole life just doing that. I mean, just researching. I'm just really fascinated by, I mean, they're just extraordinary things in the world, wacky, wonder, you know, incredible, weird things. And then again, I think the Oxford Dictionary is extraordinary. The definitions and what they're based on, and then they offer you the quotes from different eras. It's just, I mean, it's just like chocolate.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I don't think you have a choice over your obsessions. That's why they're obsessions, right? I mean, I think that's why Emily Dickinson called them flood subjects. I think whatever is flooding out of you is something to chase. I think if anything, it's giving yourself permission to let something be your obsession. I think for me, for the longest time, I think going back to what Diane was saying earlier with the workshop of just like being alone in your own imagination and saying, it's okay that I want to chase this, or I love Paige talking about the OED, or whatever you're obsessed with, whatever that, whether it's high, low art, whatever, you know, Chaucer, Pokemon, like chase it, braid it, do whatever you want with it. And I think that took me a long time to give myself, I'm a poet of intertextuality, and I want to smash high and low art together. And I didn't know that I can do that. And the work, talking about the workshop again, it was a place where a lot of people would say, Tiana, I don't understand what you're doing, or it wants to sanitize risk. And it actually was a way for me when my poem didn't do well in workshop. I was like, oh, this is good. Like and it helped me know I was on the right track, because it was making people uncomfortable, and it wasn't I wasn't chasing a linearity that made sense to them. So I was like, oh yes, like I'm still in this wild thing, and I want to ride this Bronco until the end. I thought I wanted to be a historian. So Paige, and you're saying that earlier, I love research as well. And for me, there's so many gaps in history. And I think as writers of all kinds, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, we get to write into those lacunas, you know, from personal and imagined, you know, it's a collage of experiences. And so I love to play with those gaps in history and in space and time. I'm losing my train of thought. But all I have to say is, for a while when I was a historian, everything was coming out as verse, and I was really freaked out, because I was like, oh God, what do you do when you love history, but everything's coming out lyric? I was like, oh, a poet. But I just let myself, I think if anything, it's just giving yourself permission to be who you are on the page, whatever that person is. And I think you've seen that with Diane and Paige, and why it feels so palpable and amazing. Is just allowing yourself that permission.
I think of research as kind of a pilgrimage, and you know, your obsessions come to you. I woke up from a dream for the book before Frank, and the words still life were all I had from the dream, still life. And I love painting, I love visual art, but I wasn't particularly in love with still life painting. But I started researching it, and the first painting I saw when I typed in still life was still life with 2 dead peacocks and a girl, which became my book. And following it, you know, I think it's not just what are the facts and who did what, but I started going down the path of the women still life painters who nobody knew about. And then how still life painting was seen sort of as the bottom rung of fine art. And why is that? Well, think about the subject matter, kitchens and pots and fruit and, you know, and often it was seen as just practice, you know, what people did for practice. And so then I started seeing, oh, there's a connection with this obsession and where I'm from, a matriarchal rural reality. And so it all came together into sort of myth making that I hadn't expected. And so serendipity, obsession, research, and then finding those odd connections with your own history, with your own, you know, what you're here to tell. You know, for me, that part of who I am, that background, that rural landscape, those people, the working poor, those are the people I'm stuck with. That's the landscape that I think I'm here to explore. And those paintings gave me a way. So you never know. You can trust. I trust the mystical more than I trust myself.
I think we have time for only one more question. So sorry if we didn't get to your question, but you can look online and see where else these amazing poets are reading, and you can go to their next reading and ask your question there. So we have a question from someone who wanted to know about how you decide to read your poems, if you have any advice about reading, because so often, she says, at poetry readings, it feels like people are really reading their poems, but she felt as though all of you were talking to us. It was a very personal performance of your work. Any thoughts on that?
Okay, so it's really hard to do. I'm really shy, and I will
Mm.
just read the words, and it's very difficult. You kind of try to get into the mode where you're talking to somebody in front of you and pausing and trying to pause so that it can be absorbed, but I find it incredibly difficult. It's not easy for me to do.
I got my sea legs, going to lots of open mic nights and shaking with my paper. It takes I think it takes a while to build up. It's a presence, right? But that presence start with your inner reality and how you view yourself. And I think for me, just as much as you want to show up on the page as yourself, you show up in your own performance as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you're awkward or weird, you make a weird outro or side, whatever. Like I just lean into those. That's how you fall in love with them, right? It's through their weird, idiosyncratic ways. It's not through their perfection. I learned this when I became a professor. I thought I had to be all erudite and perfect. But when I would be a fallible, messy human in front of my students, it allowed them to be messy, vulnerable students, which is what I wanted them to be on the page. And so I think sometimes whatever we think the production of a poem is, just like be yourself. And so much of that click and that metronome and that music is in the writing. I often print out my poems and read them out loud, and I record myself back and I edit off my breath. That metronome and that rhythm is already there for me. The sheet music is there. So when I read it, I don't have to pretend. I just have to be present in the moment and click into my poem, and then it just flows. There's no artifice there, right? I do try to breathe a little bit for my performance. There's like some rituals, some tea. I do try to think about, what do I want to read tonight? What do I feel? I always want to read what I'm excited to read, because that excitement will always show.
Yeah, I just try to slow down and be heard. I got to hear Gwendolyn Brooks read, I think 3 times in person. And I've never heard a reader like Gwendolyn Brooks. Holy shit. And one thing that I noticed is that every word was valued separately. And, I felt like each word was like an egg she was holding in her hand. And she came across with such authority and still connecting with every listener. So my hope is just to be heard, to value every word, and to think of the energy of the poem as something, even through this screen we're all staring into, that connects my experience with yours, that gives you some. I want to give you something. And so I hope that comes through.
And speaking of wanting to give us something, the 3 of you have been so generous and so incredible tonight, with not only with your work, but with your answers to our questions. What a wonderful trio. Thank you, Paige, for setting this up. It's really wonderful. Sometime I hope we'll have you, Paige, back at the center in person. Diane, if you're ever in our neck of the woods when we reopen, and same with you, Tiana. And if any of you want to teach a one-day class at the Writer's Center, our students would be absolutely thrilled to have you. So that's an open invitation on Zoom, a weekend class. Thank you all. Thank you, Sophia, for all of your incredible work and support. Thank you to our wonderful audience for always being here. We have another reading on June 23rd, and we have another one, Tim Siebel's, on the 30th of June. So please look at our calendar, sign up, save the date for our gala on November 5th. And we will be saving the chat and sending it to Diane, Paige, and Tiana, so they will be able to read. Thank you all for being here tonight. It was wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everybody who's here.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Diane and Tiana and Jennifer and Sophia and everybody who's here.
Yes, so much gratitude. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. This was really a special night, and it didn't feel like Zoom. It felt like we were together.
It did.
It did. It was really incredible. And don't forget these books. Get them. Dottie wants you to order them.
And look at those. I'm so honored to read with you two women too.
Same. Right back at
Thank you.
Same
Yeah.
here.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer.
We'll be in touch and we'll make sure that Jesse sends you out your honoraria.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jennifer.
Bye, everyone. Thanks
Bye.
for being here. Such a great audience.